Is the person who robbed you present in the court today?
Yes.
And could you point him out to the court, please?
There.
Let the record show that the witness has identified the defendant, Mr. Saki.
And so what you see there is you see the witness identifying the defendant as apparently the one that perpetrated this crime. That does actually happen. That is a real thing, and that is typically done in criminal trials.
Thank you, Mr. Harkness.
Your witness, Mr. Goodman?
Thank you for coming in today, Mr. Harkness. I just want to clarify a few things from your testimony, if that's okay.
So what you see here is you see him approaching the podium, right, with his tablet, and he's about ready to begin his examination. And that's actually normally the way things work in a courtroom. You usually either have to stand at counsel table or sit at counsel table, or they give you a podium, to go up to, and you can conduct your examination from there.
Okay. So you were working at the Sandia Mart the night of the 30th, is that correct?
And so now you see him actually approaching the witness. That's typically not allowed unless you get permission from the court first. So you have to ask the court, hey, may I approach the witness? And there usually needs to be a reason for that, as opposed to him just kind of coming up and getting closer to the witness for no apparent reason. But one thing we should talk about is Saul's suit. I mean, what is up with that? That is horrible. That's awful. And so normally what you want to do as an attorney is you want to try to dress as conservatively as possible. You don't want to draw attention to what you're wearing. You want to be, like I said, very conservative. You want to be, kind of somewhat, you don't want to be too flashy. You don't want to, wear an expensive watch and fancy shoes and things like that, because there's no reason for you to try to increase the distance between yourself and the jury. The trial, after all, is about trying to gain the jury's, trust and to try to get them to have some sort of, confidence and to believe that you're a credible person. And it only hurts you to do that if you show up, looking very different than what they look like. And so I normally try to be very bland, so to speak, with what I wear in the courtroom. If you're some sort of legend, like a Jerry Spence or a Johnny Cochran, then you can show up in a double-breasted, pinstripe suit with your $100,000 Rolex, and that probably wouldn't shock anybody because they know who you are. But that's not, and even if I was legendary like that, I still wouldn't dress like that. And Saul, it goes perfect with his character, but that's a horrific suit.
Got in at noon, left at midnight.
That's a long day. Mm-hmm. Good for you. Nothing wrong with a hard day's work. So you say, a man came in and he reached across the counter and, quote.
All right, so what you saw there, you saw a little bit of commentary where he was trying to get folksy with the witness. Technically speaking, that's not necessarily allowed because it's a sidebar comment in the middle of your question. You're not even really asking a question. You're just commenting about how it's good to have a hard day's work and things like that, or hard day's work or something like that. But, there's no reason really for the prosecutor to object to that at this stage, even though he could. What you also saw is you saw Saul turn back to the podium, and he turned his back on the witness and he turned his back on the jury, which is not something that I would encourage any lawyer to do, right? If you're going to turn your back on a witness ever, I would only do that if the witness was showing to be evasive or combative, and then I would turn my back on the witness to show kind of my lack of respect for what the witness is doing. But I'd never turn my back on the jury if at all possible. That's just not good practice.
He grabbed up the money from my register and run off.
Yeah.
And there was no one else in the store.
Not at that time, no.
And so you can hear Saul, and he's asking leading questions, right? Now, leading question is a question that contains the answer within it. Normally, you'll hear the witness either respond yes or no, and that's it, right? Because the question is got the answer in it, and Saul is leading. He's allowed to lead because he's on cross-examination. This is not his witness. It's the prosecution's witness.
And since the camera system wasn't working at the time, you're the only one who saw the perpetrator.
Yeah, I guess so.
So Saul glances back to what I only can assume is his love interest in the gallery. Again, not a good idea. I wouldn't want to have that clouding my judgment, thinking about getting with her later while I'm trying to do my cross-examination. So that's not something I would encourage us to do.
Yeah, so this person came in and they bought something.
I think it was an Almond Joy.
They bought an Almond Joy, and when you rang them up, that's when they snatched the cash from the register. Sounds like it happened pretty fast, but you say you got a good look at them, correct?
And so this question is really more of speech, several different facts in it before the witness is allowed to respond. The prosecutor could clearly object as a compound question, and the prosecutor doesn't at this stage, however.
Yes.
You must drink stronger coffee than I do, because after 11 hours on the job, I can barely see straight.
Again, he's got all of these little sidebar comments in the middle of his questions, which, technically speaking, is not appropriate. You always, of course, try to get away with what you can, but at some point, I think probably the judge or the prosecutor would have stepped in real life.
And it was dark out.
Well, he's the only guy that came in that night that wasn't made up like a bat or a cat or whatever the hell those guys are. And he was right up in my face.
And so what you saw there is Saul was actually speaking to the jury and going through and making an argument in the middle of his cross-examination, which wouldn't, of course, be allowed. That's not something that you can do.
Right, and according to your testimony, you feel confident that you can identify this person. That's what you're saying.
I can. Absolutely. It's him. Your client.
Are you sure that's the person? There's no doubt in your mind. Take your time.
And so what Saul is doing here, of course, is he's really tying the witness to his story, which is a really important part of the impeachment process. One of the steps that you want to do before you impeach a witness is make sure to nail them down firmly, because the last thing you want to do is leave them wiggle room, and then you spring your impeachment on them only to have them go and explain it away. And so you have to tie the witness firmly to their story first before you impeach them.
I don't need time. That's him.
Now, would you be surprised to learn, Mr. Harkness, that the person you just pointed to is not the defendant?
What?
And my client is in the back of the courtroom. Mr. Sakey, would you please stand up?
Objection.
Now, the person you ID'd is named Hollis Early. He's a bartender down in Berlin.
And so this sort of trickery would not be allowed. It would be frowned upon by the court, which it is in this clip as well. But that might even result in a mistrial. So it's good for TV, though. It makes it fun.
He has a very good alibi for the night in question.
Your Honor, objection.
Oh, Mr. Goodman, really?
You didn't recognize him either, Your Honor.
And so probably not also a good idea to chastise the court for or mock the court for not recognizing that the defendant was actually in the back of the gallery. So none of this, or very little of this, is realistic, but it's good TV.